Hi, my name is Aaron Waldron, and I'm currently pursuing a Master's of Divinity at the New York Theological Seminary, with a focus in Black Studies as well as Liberation Theology. My journey at NYTS has been revolutionary as well as transformative. Everyone is on a journey, but not everyone shares their journey. What you're about to experience is a journey for justice, shared by so many, but told by so few. The following poem best explains our host. Brother art thee, with your sharp suit and strappy shoes, your voice of courage, brother art thee. From Arkansas all the way to New York City, a boy made a man, wading in the water for the right moment to stand. A spirit-led warrior, a modern-day prophet, delivering gospel in an Esquire getup. Truth never looked so good, nor felt so personal. Brother art thee. It's my pleasure and my honor to be introducing visiting professor of urban ministry, African American history, and religion, as well as the director of the Doctor of Ministry program at New York Theological Seminary, the Reverend Dr. C. Vernon Mason.
I was born in Tucker, Arkansas, Tucker. Tucker, Arkansas is where they have the Commons, Cummis prison farm. That's just a quick point. And then fast forward to when I was 7 years old, and that's when our next door neighbor, Isidore Banks, was lynched.
This is where the story of Isidore Banks unfolds. In a small town called Amerikan, Isidore Banks entered the world in the year 1895. This particular region was engulfed in a pressurized clash against whites and blacks during Isidore's youngest years, and it only continued to worsen as he aged. Regardless of the racial tension a young black man like Isidore faced growing up in Arkansas, Isidore was not your average rule. In fact, Banks had created a life for himself that afforded him a hefty social standing, which stemmed from the wealth of his 1,000-acre farmland, sales of land to local townspeople, and he additionally owned several businesses as well. Isidore was known to be a hardworking young man, and in the year 1917, at the height of the First World War, Isidore was drafted, returning from overseas after 1 year as an American veteran. Upon his return, he continued to patriotically give back to his local community, often supplying the black schools with supplies and granting personal loans to poor farmers in the area. It seems that Isidore was leading a very promising life. That's when he met and fell in love with Alice Biggs. Though they endured chastising by white citizens in Marion, the Banks family lived undisturbed by severe discrimination until the year 1954. On June 18th, Alice said goodbye to Isidore as he was off to pay the farmers their wages. She watched her husband leave the property towards town, but he did not return later that evening. In a panic, Alice reported his disappearance at once to the police, and thus began the search for Isidore. Days passed, and no signs of the 300-pound man were detected. Alice, relentless in her efforts to find the man she loved, continued the search diligently. On the fourth day, Isidore was found. A man named Carl Kroom, who was assisting in the search party, stated that he stumbled upon the remains in a dense wood because he knew that Isidore had gone to that very area quite often. When the authorities arrived at the crime scene, they were horrified to discover the unrecognizable remains of Mr. Banks hanging from a tree, his mangled body so charred from a ground fire below him that he barely looked human at all. Upon further inspection, it was noted that there was a large hole in the blackened remains of Isidore's abdomen. Later, it would be speculated that this large hole was either from a shotgun blast or a large blade. Although the cause of the hole in his stomach would not be solved, the remains continued to tell a dark story about how Isidore met his fate. On the ground below him were several items left by the killer mob: a set of keys, random coins, and a small empty gas can were strewn about the crime scene, indicating to the officers that he had been executed by more than just a handful of people. Notably, one of the investigators of the scene determined that there were no traces of large bloodstains anywhere within the vicinity of Isidore's lifeless body. Thus, it became a strong possibility that the crime may have been committed elsewhere, and a group of men transferred the body to the location in the woods. A sequence of events began to emerge rapidly during the investigation. Alice was the last to see her husband alive on that early June morning, and it was concluded that after he had left the home, someone attacked him, likely a large group of men due to Banks's heavy size, and they began torturing the victim. Isidore's truck was found not far from the tree that he was hung from, and inside the truck remained his shotgun and leather jacket. This suggests that whomever stopped him on his trip to Marion, Isidore likely approached them without apprehension since he didn't bring his gun, making the murder all the more gut-wrenching when they realized that he likely knew his killers. After being attacked by the perpetrators, Banks would have been beaten and shot multiple times based on the injuries present on the remains. It is unclear to this day, but it's assumed that Isidore was then hung from a tree after the beating, and then he was set on fire. The coroner posited that he was not alive when his body was burned, though no further clarification was given as to why he believed this. To add insult to injury, after her husband's passing, Alice was told by the county authorities that Isidore owed taxes on his property, and because of this, the 1,000-acre land would not be inherited by her or their children, but instead it would be auctioned off to the highest bidder in an effort to squeeze blood from a turnip. She lost her husband, she lost the businesses, she lost the home, all over the mysterious death of the man she loved.
Jump back to foundational in terms of Arkansas. We got Isidore Banks. We got Emmett Till when I was 8.
Emmett Till was born on July 25, 1941, in Chicago, Illinois, to Louis and Mamie Till. Right around Emmett's second birthday, Till's father Louis joined the ranks to fight in World War II, but he never returned home. After his father died, Emmett's mother Mamie gave him all that remained of Louis, which was a gold ring with the inscription, May 25, 1943, LT. Mamie sought the help of her mother in raising young Emmett at this point, since she was now a single mother herself. For the next 10 years, Emmett made friends at school, and he was becoming a young man. His friends at McCosh Elementary School in Chicago recalled that Emmett was always one to make other students laugh, and that his personality was captivating. One such friend, Richard Hurd, recalled that Emmett used to lift his shirt up to expose his chubby abdomen, and who would make his belly roll in waves of fat.
He was, a harmless guy. Fun-loving, liked to laugh.
The other students would laugh to the point of tears, and Emmett seemed happy to hear the laughter. Not only was he a funny student, but he was also a responsible one with a bright future, and he was always in the highest of spirits. In the summer of 1955, Emmett was invited to visit the home of his great-uncle down in Mississippi. His mother, Mamie, had her reservations, but she decided to trust her son and began to give him warnings of how the South is different than the North. She explained that in Mississippi, a black child or adult should always move off the sidewalk and put their head down if a white person is walking toward them. She also told him that he is only to address whites as sir or ma'am, and under no circumstance should he ever talk to a white woman. With apprehension, she watched her son board the train bound for her hometown down south. It was the last time she saw Emmett alive. Just 2 weeks after arriving at his Uncle Moses' house in the small town of Money, Mississippi, Emmett and a handful of his cousins went to Bryant's grocery store on the far end of town after a day of cotton picking for some spending money. The store was owned by Roy and Carolyn Brandt, and Mrs. Brandt was the one working on this specific day. While the complaint and fabricated story of Carolyn has only recently been exposed as completely exaggerated, the encounter has been the subject of scrutiny for over 70 years. The one specific error that can be agreed upon by both parties is that while Emmett was in the store buying bubble gum from the owner's wife, he whistled at her. In an apparent caution to the wind moment, Carolyn became enraged, stormed out of the store, and began walking to her car, supposedly to fetch a gun. The boys became understandably spooked and ran off in fear of what type of consequence was to come their way. For 3 days, they sat terrified of what was going to happen and when. But by the 4th day, nothing had come of the incident, and the young group of teens foolishly let their guard down. On the 4th night, the evening of August 28, 1955, Emmett was asleep upstairs at his great-uncle's house when 2 white men drove up the driveway in the middle of the night. Roy Brandt, Carolyn's husband and owner of the store, along with his half-brother, J.W. Milam, approached the house with flashlights, baseball bats, and guns in hand. After banging on the door, Emmett's great-uncle Mose opened it to see the men standing there, ready to attack the 14-year-old child.
About 2:30, I heard a voice at the door, and I asked who was it, and they said, "This is Mr. Bryant. I want to talk with you and the boy."
J.W. Milan then asked Mose how old he was, to which Mose replied, 64, sir. J.W. responded by saying, "You won't turn 65 if you tell anyone about this."
The noise, they, woke me up. And this guy with the pistol told me to lay back down and go to sleep. It took me a while to figure out what was going on.
When they marched him to the door, they opened the door and got to the car. Near to the car, they asked the question, "Is this the right one?" And I heard a boy say, "Yes." And they drove off toward money with him.
At that, the white men drug a crying and terrified Emmett out of the house, and he was thrown into the vehicle. Emmett's uncles and cousins watched the car drive off into the night, with fear still gripping the entire household. Several hours passed, and Emmett had not returned home. His uncle later told the court that he knew as soon as the sun rose on the fields that day that he would never see his nephew again. In his grief, he called Emmett's mother Mamie and told her what had taken place. Though the police were immediately notified, only a report had been written and no investigation had been instigated by the authorities. 3 days passed when 2 boys who were fishing along the banks of the Tallahatchie River noticed something odd in the water. As they approached something that seemed to be floating on the surface of the river, they realized it was the feet and legs of someone being held down by what looked like a large metal wheel. They quickly reported this to their parents, who involved the police. When the police arrived, they removed a 75-pound metal fan blade that was attached to Emmett's neck with loops of barbed wire, and they removed his badly beaten corpse from the river. Emmett had been beaten so badly that his face was completely unrecognizable. Once the body was released back to Chicago for burial, Mamie went to see the corpse of her only child. The body had been delivered to the morgue in a wooden box that had been purposefully nailed shut. Mamie demanded that the box be opened so that she could see her charismatic young Emmett and to see what he endured during the murder. Later, Mamie described to reporters that she began the viewing by starting at his feet and working her way up the legs to the torso. She said she'd noticed deep gashes or stab wounds on his legs, several areas that looked as though the bones were broken, and she said his genitals had been completely cut off. She then said he had gashes and pieces of bone sticking out of his abdomen and ribs, and she saw that he had broken fingers on his hands as well. On one of those fingers was his father's ring, still inscribed, May 25th, 1943, LT. As she made her way up to his face, Mamie knew that what she was about to see was never going to leave her mind, but she said she felt she had to stay strong so that she could tell Emmett's story in court. When her eyes met his neck, she first noticed his tongue. Emmett's tongue had been removed entirely and then shoved back into his mouth. She said his cheeks and mouth were bloated and swollen beyond recognition, and his nose looked as though it had been beaten with a meat hammer. One of his eyes had popped out of its socket and was laying on its mangled cheek, while the other eye appeared to be completely absent. She then noticed a hole in Emmett's head above his temple. His ear was gone, but past that hole, she could see through to the other side and saw daylight. She couldn't believe that he was shot in the head on top of every other brutality he had suffered. At the top of Emmett's head was a large gash, that spanned the entire length of the scalp. The mortician later explained to her that this was the site that the murderers began to skin Emmett alive by pulling the skin away from the cranium and down towards the chin. Apparently, his killers did not complete this part of the murder and simply pulled the facial skin back up before tying his neck with barbed wire and the metal fan blade as they dumped him in the river carelessly. The mortician asked Mamie if she wanted an open casket. She was faced with the most heinous version of her son for burial, but her brave response was, "Yes, I want the world to see what they did to my baby." Mamie later explained that she needed the public to see Emmett's disfigured face because she knew that no one could ever possibly believe that a human being could be that evil to a child. Her decision in this moment was one that eventually led to over 50,000 people viewing his mangled face, according to the Smithsonian Institute record. This decision, despite how undeniably difficult, truly spurred the actions of tens of thousands of African Americans to begin standing up for the injustices of the Jim Crow South. After the world learned of Emmett Till's death, a trial began. Because voting rights for blacks were stifled in the state of Mississippi, an all-white jury, a white judge, white attorneys, and a white audience went to trial. Despite the obvious evidence, Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were found not guilty. It took the jury only 50 minutes to reach a verdict. However, one juror later stated that they had made up their minds in the first 5 minutes, but they'd stalled while drinking soda pop so that it wouldn't seem so obvious. Within just 4 months after the trial, the two killers sold their story to a magazine, and since they cannot be tried for the same crime twice, their confession to the editors was able to be told in great detail. Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam admitted to everything and explained precisely how they killed the 14-year-old child. Never once in all the years that passed did either man ever show the slightest remorse for the murder. Roy Bryant died of cancer in August of 1994, almost 40 years after he committed one of the nation's most brutal inhumanities of the century. His half-brother J.W. Milam died of bone cancer 13 years prior. Despite giving a full account of their crimes, neither man ever spent a single day in custody for their heinous actions. Until the day he died, Roy Bryant refused to talk about the case after he confessed for the money all those years ago. Carolyn Bryant never spoke about her lies during the trial. She confessed to the judge that Emmett had touched her, flirted with her, and was being provocative towards her. However, near the end of her life, Carolyn finally admitted that this was all a lie. She said the only thing that took place was that Emmett whistled at her. Emmett's mother, Mamie Till, spent her life speaking out against Jim Crow-era trials and injustices of the system that failed her son. Mamie kept his memory alive by publicly telling his tale and bringing to light the racial inequalities of America. She died on January 6th of 2003. At one of her last speaking engagements, she said, "With each day, I give thanks for the blessings of life, the blessings of another day, and the chance to do something with it. Something good, something significant, something helpful. No matter how small it might seem, I want to keep making a difference."
So those two things as a child were foundational for me in terms of my journey for justice.
The Abyssinian Baptist Church was established in 1808. It was founded as a result of racial segregation in the First Baptist Church located on Gold Street in Lower Manhattan. Several Ethiopian merchants visited the church to worship, and they were told that they had to sit in a segregated section of the church. Well, they refused because they did not understand segregation in the house of God and walked out. Several African Americans who were worshiping their free African Americans in New York saw that and walked out with them. And they got together and decided to establish a church where all people can worship. And they named it for the Ethiopians, the Abyssinians. They named it the Abyssinian Baptist Church.
The Abyssinian Baptist Church has had a number of notable pastors. One of these pastors include Reverend Thomas Paul, an African-American minister from Boston. Paul was involved in the movement which sought to form independent Baptist black churches. After being ordained, Paul wanted to preach at a Baptist church in Boston, but was denied due to segregation. Frustrated by this oppression, he joined others in founding the Abyssinian Baptist Church and became its first pastor.
Thomas Paul was followed by his brother Benjamin Paul, who served the church from 1809 to 1810, and then again in 1823 to 1831. Both brothers were avid abolitionists who used the church as a vehicle to launch their anti-slavery campaigns. Benjamin Paul was outspoken on the issue of abolishing slavery. Once New York had granted emancipation, he turned his attention to colonization in Africa and Canada. He did not believe that all blacks should leave the United States, but thought that they should have the option to emigrate for a better life due to the racial prejudice in the United States.
Under the Paul brothers' leadership, the church was used as a meeting place for a number of anti-slavery rallies. In 1828, an anti-slavery benefit was held for an African prince who had been enslaved in Mississippi named Abraham Abd ar-Rahman. This benefit was held to raise funds to send him back to his home country, which was Liberia. This was one of the many anti-slavery meetings the church held.
The church's involvement in activist movements persisted throughout history. Most notably, Reverend Dr. Adam Clayton Powell had a major impact on the civil rights movement. He collaborated with many other influential leaders, such as Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Martin Luther King Jr. Powell's legacy continues to this day, as the church is still an institution based on racial equality and social activism.
As I know here, you're in trouble, where it says about 30% are unemployed. That's why I'm working hard to get this surplus food here. Some of you say to me, well, I'm not like you. I'm not a congressman. I haven't got education. I haven't got work. But you're a human being. And you know what you've got? You've got in your hand the power to use your vote and to use even those few cents you get from welfare to spend them only where you want to spend them. A young slave boy stood one day before the greatest ruler of his day. And God said to Moses, what's in your hand? And Moses said, Lord, only I've got a stick, that's all. He said, well, let me use what's in your hand. And God used that slave boy with a stick in his hand to divide the Red Seas, march through a wilderness, bring water out of rocks, manna from heaven, and bring his people to freedom land. What's in your hand? What's in your hand? George Washington Carver, who was so frail that he was traded for a broken-down horse as a slave boy. And George Washington Carver, sitting in the science laboratory at Tuskegee, told me, he said, Dr. Powell, he said, I just go out in the fields each morning at 5 o'clock, and I let God guide me. And I bring back these little things and work them over my laboratory, and that man did more to revolutionize the agricultural science of peanuts and of cotton and sweet potato than any other human being in the field of agricultural science. What's in your hand? Just let God use you, that's all. What's in your hand? I've got a string in my hand, that's all, and I'm flying a kite. And way up in the heavens, lightning strikes it, and I, Benjamin Franklin, discover for the first time the possibilities of electricity with a string in my hand. What's in your hand? Little hunchback sitting in a Roman jail? I haven't got anything in my hand but an old quill pen, but God says, write what I tell you to write. Paul wrote, I have run my race with patience. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth is laid up in me a contract. What's in your hand, little boy? All I've got is a slingshot. And the enemies of my people are great and big and more numerous than we are. Well, little David, go down to the brook and pick out a few stones and come on back and close your eyes if you want to and pull back that slingshot and let it go. And David killed the biggest enemy, the leader of the giants, against his people, and his people became free, just letting God guide a stone in his hand. And a few years passed, and David is a king. And God says, what's in your hand? He said, I've got a harp in my hand. He said, well, David, play on your harp. And he played, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Leadeth me beside still waters. Yea, though I walk through the valley and the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. What's in your hand? What's in your hand? Man hanging on a cross. I've got 2 nails in my hand. Father, I stretch my hands to thee. No other help I know. If thou withdraws thyself from me, whither shall I go? And that man, with 2 nails in his hand, split history in half, BC and AD.
A classmate of mine, his name was Matthew Crawford from Birmingham, Alabama. That summer, both of us were working at the Beau Rivage restaurant in Spring Lake, New Jersey. We were there from June to the latter part of August. And so we saw that speech on television, black and white, 1963, of Dr. King, and both of us as students in Morehouse, we were just especially proud. I always tell the truth about my matriculation at Morehouse College. Some folks were Phi Beta Kappas. Some folks were magna cum laude. When I graduated, I was thank you, Lordy, because when I met a young lady who was going to become my wife later, Thelma Rollins from Galveston, Texas, in September of 1965, I was on the strictest probation that you could be on at Morehouse. 1 phone call kept me from being expelled and put out. And when I met Thelma, that's what turned my life around in terms of academics at Morehouse, because I understood if I flunked out, that was it. Okay, so I changed my major from psychology to political science. I made the dean's list. I went to summer school, and then in 1967, as we were approaching graduation, and that's why I want to bring those little clips about the consortium in. I had interviewed a new program that was trying to deal with some of the rebellions that were taking place in the country. You know, we had Watts, we had even though we had the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, there was a lot of turmoil, in terms of social justice and racial justice in this country. And so this professor at Washington University named Dr. Sterling Chain had said, how could corporate America respond to this, or how should corporate America respond to this? And he came up with this concept. We need to break these walls down, because there are no, and at that time they were focusing on Black men. There are no Black men really in corporate America in these management positions in corporate America. So he came up with this concept of the consortium, which was ended up being Indiana University, University of Wisconsin, Washington University, and St. Louis. And I applied for this fellowship, even though I didn't have a business background. I was a political science major, but I did well on the test that they administered for this. And to my excitement and great delight, and Thelma's great delight, I got a telegram that, and then you got those little clips, from the consortium. Remember that? We may run some of that. I had been accepted, and and so I got a fellowship to Indiana University, where I concentrated graduate business school, applied urban economics. On May 30th, 1967, Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays, that was his last year at Morehouse, presided over our commencement. I graduated that morning and got married that afternoon, and Thelma had graduated from Spelman the previous day. So I want to give ultimate kudos to my wife who saved me at Morehouse College.
Let me begin with 1963. There was the famous March on Washington, the speech given by Dr. King, the I Have a Dream speech. Also that same year, 4 little girls in Birmingham, Alabama were murdered while attending Sunday school, about 2 or 3 weeks after that speech. That same year, in November, President John Kennedy was assassinated. 1964, the Civil Rights Act. 1965, the Voting Rights Act. Watts, major rebellion, as in Los Angeles in 1965. And with all of this unrest and the backdrop of the Vietnam War, Dr. Shane, and I think both in terms of insight and foresight, conceived of an idea to attempt to do something that had not been done in the business community, and we call it diversity now. They talked about trying to change the landscape of the business community, where there were virtually, at that point, no black men in management positions. And that's what excited me about just hearing the vision of a professor at Washington University who was both addressing the social and the political aspects of what was going on in America at that time. And when I got that telegram indicating that I had been accepted to the consortium, it was just tears of joy.
Summer of 1963, August 28th, 1963, was the March on Washington. And as a freshman and then, going into my sophomore year that fall at Morehouse College, I was especially proud of the incredible speech and presentation by Martin Luther King Jr. That's August 28th, 1963. I'm talking about some foundational things now. When 3 weeks later, the Ku Klux Klan bombed those 4 little girls, and I want to call their names, with that great march that had taken place that brought together people from the labor movement, brought together, different ethnic and racial groups and all of that, this massive march for justice. The answer was the Klan killing 4 little girls and injuring others in a church on Sunday morning.
September 15th, 1963, was one of the darkest days in the civil rights movement. 4 young black girls, aged 11 to 14, were killed when a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. The girls had been attending Sunday school. More than 20 other churchgoers were injured in the blast. It was the largest black church in Birmingham, a focal point in the African American community. It served as a meeting place for civil rights organizers in their efforts to sign up new voters. Racial tensions in Birmingham were reaching a fever pitch, and on that Sunday morning, a white man was seen placing a box under the church steps. A short time later, the box detonated, and the resulting explosion rocked the building, with 400 churchgoers inside. Immediately after the bombing, police clashed with enraged members of the black community. Before the day ended, at least 2 other black teens had been killed. More than 10 years later, in 1977, a white supremacist named Robert Chomless was convicted of murder for participating in the bombing. Then in the year 2000, the FBI announced that 3 other men were also involved. One of them was already dead, but the other 2 were tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison.
But on April 4th, 1968, our hero, our Morehouse hero, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. That left another scar and void in my life that has never been healed. I was young, and Dr. King had gone through all kinds of situations. And in my naivete, I did not think that he would be murdered and assassinated. But that put something in my mind in terms of a journey for justice that was burning.
If I think of my life as a class and what I've really learned, I've learned a few things. First, I'm aware that I'm a child of God. It's such an amazing understanding to think that the it, which made fleas and mountains and rivers and stars, made me. What I prayed for is humility, to know that there is something greater than I. Then I have to know that the brute, the bigot, and the batterer are all children of God, whether they know it or not. And I'm supposed to treat them accordingly. And it's hard, and I blow it all the time.
Mongrel class of people.
I'd like everybody to think of a statement by Terence. The statement is, I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. If you can internalize the least portion of that, you will never be able to say of an act, a criminal act, or I couldn't do that. No matter how heinous the crime, if a human being did it, you have to say, I have in me all the components that are in her or in him. I intend to use my energies constructively as opposed to destructively. If you can do that about the negative, just think what you can do about the positive. If a human being dreams a great dream, dares to love somebody, if a human being dares to be Martin King or Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Malcolm X, if a human being dares to be bigger than the condition into which she or he was born, it means so can you. And so you can try to stretch yourself. So you can internalize, homo sum, humani nihila me alienum puto. I am a human being. Nothing human can be alien to me. That's one thing I'm learning.
The Negro National Anthem lift every voice and sing is a prayer. And I offer you that prayer now. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far along the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shattered beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Amen, 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 and God bless NYTS.